So Grace Callahan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's so nice to talk with a Casco Bay High School person. I have high school envy. I mean, I was really happy about my high school experience. It was not in this country, but it sounds like it has really laid out a pretty profound foundation for you and where you are right now in your life.
Yes, definitely. It was a great 3 years.
3 years. Now, why 3 years? Because it's a 4-year school.
I went to Deering for 1 year.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Do people know that?
Yes.
Now, you have a family connection over at Deering.
Yes, my aunt was a guidance counselor there for many, many years.
Was she there when you were a freshman?
She was.
Yeah.
She was. Yeah. She's at Cape now, but she was at Deering, I don't know how many years, but yeah.
But you grew up in the Portland public school system. You went to Longfellow and Lincoln.
And Lincoln. Lincoln's right up my street. And then Deering and Casco. So I sort of did the survey.
You did the survey. Why did you make the shift from Deering to Casco Bay?
I mean, Deering's a great school. I had a really great year there, but I think I was really intrigued by the expeditionary learning. I didn't know what it was coming from Lincoln, obviously. Like kids that come from King, they sort of have a sense of what that means. But I was intrigued, and I thought that it might really fit well with my learning interests, which I was sort of developing at that point. So I made the jump, and it worked out really well for me. So.
And when you were a sophomore at Casco Bay, what did you think your future was going to be like? Were you looking in the direction where you find yourself right now?
No, not at all. I was not. I mean, I've always loved nature, but I think I was really into the sort of reading and writing part. I didn't really think I was very good at science and math in high school. And so, yeah, I think sophomore high school me would have been quite surprised to see where I am now.
Who changed your understanding of your ability to be a scientist?
I think that was, I mean, I had some really great science teachers at Casco. I specifically Brooke Teller and Ann Laughlin. They did really great things, but I think it wasn't until I went to Wellesley, which is where I went to college, and I took, sort of on a whim, I had to take a lab class. So I took my first biology class, and sort of having that hands-on experience, being able to do an experiment and sort of make my own data, I sort of fell in love. And that was sort of the beginning of the whole thing.
So when you went to Wellesley, you were not planning to go into biology?
No, I think when I applied, I put down linguistics, which which is silly because I still don't really know what linguistics is and what they do, but I had no idea. So I think I took like art, history, writing, and biology, and that sort of was the one I liked the most.
And so when you say science, right, there's all kinds of things that we understand about it. It is as mysterious a word as love and death and all that sort of stuff. But science in its purest, and the way that you explain it to the kids at East End Community School where you substitute, what is science at its basic?
Science, and what I sort of fell in love about it, and there's lots of different kinds. There are people that work just in the sort of theoretical sphere and modeling and doing math. But what I really love is that it's observing the world, coming up with a question that you genuinely don't know the answer to, and then you can do things. You can make experiments. You can design experiments and get answers, or get data that gets you closer to an answer. And I think that sort of tactile element of it is just so cool. You can learn things that no one else has ever known, which I've never done that. But in a sense, even in like a small classroom experiment, you're doing things that in a way are new every time, and I think that's really exciting.
And it's not just a theoretical, you can express yourself and then who knows what happens. But when you finished your degree in biology, you then got an award that allowed you and required you and funded you to take a big question and explore it around the world.
I did, yes.
Yeah. So that is huge. And that is a huge endorsement of the power of your curiosity, and a testament to the skill that you have in following it in a way that's meaningful to others.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I want. I also work at Casco Bay High School as a substitute, and that they have these high schoolers have so many interesting questions and ideas of things they want to explore, and I think the money and the opportunities to do those things, they exist out there. You just have to keep sort of knocking on doors and convincing other people that your questions are as interesting as you find them, which they are. So that's sort of what I hope that the high school students start to realize about themselves.
So when you were at Wellesley, you quickly moved into studying biology. Mm-hmm. And was there a particular focus within biology that you had during your years?
Yeah. So I started off my first, I really wanted to do more research. And so my first summer at Wellesley, I applied to the research program that they have on campus, and I worked with a professor who studies plants. So for that project, we were doing a lot of work in the field, studying a specific type of invasive plant and taking...
What was that, out of curiosity?
Garlic mustard.
Okay.
Yeah. You can find it all. It's a pretty common plant. You can also eat it. And it's not super aggressively invasive, but it's non-native. It's from Eurasia. And we were interested in quantifying its niche, so the space in which it occupies. This sort of theoretical concept, we wanted to put numbers to it. So basically, sounds fancy, but what I was doing was taking lots of very controlled scoops of soil 6 hours a day, 5 days a week.
What is a controlled scoop? What does that mean?
So I would take a little core and I would stick it into the ground at these very specific places.
What do you mean by a core?
Oh, sorry. Like a hollow, like a big metal straw, kind of.
Okay.
And if you stick it into the ground and twist it and pull it out, you get this nice sample of what the surface soil is like. And then you label it and keep it, and then back at the lab, the other part of my job was running it through these machines that will tell you how much nutrients are in the soil of all these different kinds. We also tracked individual plants over different years to see how they did. And so sort of with this combination of environmental data and biological data, we built models of how plants fare. If you're an individual plant, how you will do based on what your environmental conditions are. And so I also got to sort of learn how to code like scientists code, which is very different than the way people who build websites and artificial intelligence code, but I loved that too. So it just really reinforced my interest in research, and sort of everything followed from there.
So it followed, but not directly, because you said your first love was plants.
Yes.
And one of the things I'm reminded of, I forget who it was that said it, but the idea of being a plant is that you take sunlight and carbon dioxide and turn it into food and medicine for others and yourself. And it's just kind of like a wonderful process. Mm-hmm. So that fascination with plants that can't move, then you got into other stuff. So yes. Your studies, the stuff that you were getting funded for, that we'll talk about in more detail in just a minute, the not plants. So how did you move from plants to where you're headed next? So it was sort of a windy road, and I did work on that plant project for 3 years, so almost the entire time I was at Wellesley. Do your hands still smell of garlic mustard?
Yeah, sometimes I'm reminded. I also think I at one point got 10 ticks on me in a single day. So sort of the ugly side of science, but something that's kind of fun also. Mm-hmm. But I always was interested in the ocean, obviously growing up on the coast. Sort of my entire life, childhood was spent in tide pools and sort of mucking about and looking for clams. And so it's an environment that I'm really drawn to. And shellfish are interesting. They're not photosynthetic, but they have a similar problem if we think about climate change, which is changing our environment and making it more variable and more extreme. And shellfish have a similar problem where they can't move. They're like plants. Trees, a tree is where it is. Once it's an adult, it can't move. And so that opens up a lot of questions of, how will these, sessile is the science word for basically an organism that doesn't move. How will they fare?
What's the word for an organism that can move?
Mobile.
Okay, mobile or sessile?
Mobile or sessile. Yeah. So I am now really interested in how those types of organisms that are forced to sort of adapt or adapt or die to their house where it is. They can't move it. They can't be like fish and follow where the food is and follow where their best environment is. What did their lives, how are they going to do in the future? So I was lucky in that in my third year at Wellesley, we got a marine ecologist who was hired onto the faculty. Her name is Rebecca Selden. She's super cool. And so her research is mostly on fish and fisheries and examining how humans change fish, like fish evolution, like through fishing pressure and climate change. And so with her, I was going to spend the summer studying American lobster and write my thesis on American lobster. But that was the summer of 2020. Oh. So it didn't go that well, but
the environment had a few
other plans. Yeah. But one of the big lessons of science also that, I'm still learning is that things will fail again and again and again. A tiny percentage of the experiments you do will actually have any results at all. The number of plants I've killed during my research is very high. Like, most things don't work out. So being able to pivot is really important. So I ended up creating my own research that I couldn't go into the lab and I couldn't go into the field. And so I basically learned how to use spatial data in this coding program called R. And I just sort of did a big search on the internet of all of the data on eelgrass, which is a marine grass that I could find.
Is there any eelgrass in Maine?
There is. Casco Bay has a good deal, and it's a super important habitat forming species. It's like coral for our part of the world. It serves a lot of the same purposes that coral does for the tropics. And so I was able to examine trends in eelgrass presence and absence and ask a few questions about that and write that up in my senior year at Wellesley.
And that project is what got you a fellowship from the Watson Foundation.
So, and it was like my whole, all of the sum total of my academic interests to that point. Yeah, but that was part of it. So I got that at the end of my senior year.
And it's a big deal and came with a lot of opportunity for you to explore where you wanted around the world. So tell me a little bit about the Watson Fellowship and what that was and what you did with it.
Yeah, I feel super lucky to have had the chance to even apply, and I got there with the help of a lot of professors that gave me advice and
nobody does science alone.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody does science alone. It was a group effort. But I knew that my future directions were to keep studying science, and I'm interested in climate change and species that are important both ecologically and also economically. So things that are important for us as people, but also everything else that it's in community with. And so I knew also that, from my time at Casco Bay, you're taught to examine questions from as many angles as possible, bring in as many perspectives as you can, and that's how you get the richest and most truthful answers. And so I was thinking about what kinds of projects I could do that would incorporate my scientific interests and also my sort of bigger interests. Like, what is this all for? What I want to serve people in the things that I do. And so I developed a project to look at the role of women in fisheries around the world. Because as I was sort of researching this, I came across this whole research community of people who study gender equity. So fisheries obviously are hugely important for our food security around the world and also massive economic importance. And women play a really big role in fisheries around the world, but often they're the ones that have the least protection and don't receive a lot of the security, both economic and social, that a lot of men in the profession have. But that obviously looks different everywhere. So the Watson, which I did get, is kind of the perfect grant to explore that question, because you're allowed a year outside of the US to basically explore your questions wherever they go. And there's no expectation of like a final write-up at the end. It's sort of just experiential learning. And so I was able to go to, I think, 6 countries and look at that question and how women play different roles in fisheries and what their challenges are, and also what their sort of unique expertise is in all of those different cultural contexts.
What were the 6 countries that you did your explorations in?
So I started off in Barbados, which is in the Caribbean. And then I went to Tanzania in East Africa, Spain, and then...
What part of Spain?
Northwestern Spain.
So on the Atlantic?
Galicia, yeah.
Okay.
The Atlantic. And then Vietnam. I was in southern Vietnam. And Japan. And then I finished up my year in Newfoundland, which is in sort of northeastern Canada, north of Maine.
Now,
Big
were you
island.
outside of the United States all 12 months or just mostly across?
All 12 months. You're not
Okay.
allowed to come back home. Actually, it's part of the stipulations of the grant. They kick you right out.
What a cool restriction.
Yeah, I think I didn't really understand why that. I was sort of like, well, whatever it takes, I guess. But I think coming back and reflecting on it, it's a really important part of it because it really forces you to, there isn't the option of sort of the comfort and predictability of home, so you have to adapt.
And you said that the fellowship was designed to allow you to experience your, your curiosity. Did you do any writing about it, or have you kept notes? Okay.
Yeah, so I had sort of a whole system, and they give you a lot of freedom, but I wanted to sort of get everything down. So I took lots of notes, and I did writing for myself, and I did have to send in some reports, periodical reports to the Watson Foundation, basically what I was doing and what I was learning. And then I also had a blog, so sort of for friends and family, like some of the insights that I had and photos of places that I went, so...
That's very cool. And you were there from the summer of 21 to the summer of 22.
Yes. Yeah.
But that's not your only experience diving deep into science since graduating from Wellesley in 2020 or at the end of 2020. You also had a pretty powerful experience in Washington, D.C.
Yes. So I had gotten the Watson Fellowship in March of 2021, but I couldn't go because at that point it was pretty dicey international travel. So they allowed us to defer it for up to a year, which I did. I took the deferral. So then I was faced with, what do I do for a year? And I got a job at the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine in DC, which is a large, massive nonprofit that basically brings scientists together from different disciplines to write up these reports on pressing questions in science. So basically, Congress or the public needs to know the answer to, one of the projects I worked on is what are the impacts of sunscreen on marine environments? There's all these studies coming out, but what's the consensus? What do we know? And so my job was to help coordinate all of these scientists, like it was chemists and ecologists and dermatologists even, get them together in a room and get them to write this big, long, dense report, basically answering that question, what do we all agree on? What do we know for a fact? And then the idea is that lawmakers and the public can act based on that. So that was an amazing experience, sort of looking at almost like the business end of science, like after you've done all these experiments and everyone's published their papers, like what do you do with all of that? How do you make that into something that a legislator who is not particularly interested in marine chemistry, but still needs to make a decision on whether or not you need to ban, certain sunscreen chemicals. How do you make that digestible? So it was really helpful in figuring out what I liked and what I didn't like. I think one of the things I came out of that with was, that's really cool, I'm glad people do that, but I want to be back in the lab.
So you want to be back in the lab. Right now you're sharing your passion for the lab with the students whenever you get a chance to substitute in a science class, right? Mm-hmm. But you are thinking that at some point you're going to go on and get, I'm guessing, a master's or a PhD in something that will allow you to explore your curiosity for the benefit of science and for the benefit of that particular, question.
Yeah, knock on wood. Hopefully that's what I'll be doing next year. But the process is still sort of happening.
Nice.
We'll see.
Yeah. But once you finished your year in DC and you went off and explored the world and could not come home, you wanted to spend time with family here in Maine mm-hmm. and explore teaching at least the primary school and the secondary school level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's been amazing. I loved being at Casco, and I think being there I a couple years later, a couple years older, I don't feel like as established of an adult as my teachers that I had that are still working at Casco. Like, they still feel like, mentors.
Elder statespeople.
Elder statespeople, exactly.
Right.
But it's fun to see it sort of from the teacher's perspective. Yeah.
Now, you did some sports when you were in high school. You were a skier, Nordic skier?
Nordic skier, Portland Nordic.
And are you back on skis this winter?
I am, as much as the snow cover will allow, which isn't always that much, but yeah, it's been super fun getting back into it.
And you've taken up another sport that allows you to experience your love of the ocean within a micrometer, right?
Yes, I'm surfing now.
This time of year too?
Yes, hopefully this weekend. It's supposed to be pretty nice. But
just got to have the right polyprop.
Just got to have the right wetsuit. Yeah, exactly. But it's super fun. It's like a whole world of surfers in Maine that I never met anyone who surfed when I lived here as a high schooler and middle schooler. So it's cool to come back and sort of see something new about my community.
So as you've come back, what are some of the things that you look back on about your time at Casco Bay with a different curiosity? Like, what do you wish you had paid a little more attention to, or what have you noticed since then? Because, time allows us to digest things differently.
I think, I don't know. I mean, part of me wishes that I had realized that I could do science and math earlier and had sort of, gotten over that fear I had.
But what you've done ain't too shabby.
Yeah, no, and I think, learning how to read and write and really focusing on, one of the things that helped me get through the year of being alone, which wasn't always easy, was reading. I read so much, and things that were related to my project, but also, just books that it's a really good way of centering myself, and I credit Casco Bay High School for that. Like, that was when I learned how to really live in books, and it's something that I've found a lot of comfort in ever since. And so, would I have loved to take some math classes at USM when I was a high schooler? Yes. Like, in hindsight, yes. But I think that it was what it was, and I'm grateful for the things that I learned when I was there.
I have a similar wish that I had learned the 3 questions that apparently everybody who does nature journaling knows, because it seems to me like they're powerful questions in any situation, which is, what do I notice? What do I wonder about? And what does it remind me of? And so those things were, when I had some kind of classes, so to speak, on a lake over in New Hampshire, asking those questions as we were touching plants and touching various other things in the lake, I realized that was a question that also applies to the interior life as well.
Definitely.
And so, that's the basis of science, right? It's how are you curious in a disciplined way? Yeah,
and also keeping your mind open. Like, I think, if you come in with too much preconceived notions of what you're supposed to see, you're never going to actually observe anything interesting, because you'll just be seeing what people told you to see, which is easier said than done. I think it's something I'm still working on. But yeah, what do I notice? That's like the key step.
Grace, what did I not ask you about that you would like to make sure that people know, especially the people who knew you at Casco Bay?
I think, being away for a year, I was in so many places that I loved so much, and I made really amazing friends and people that were sort of my family for, months at a time in these different places. But I also think it helped me see the things about Maine, and specifically also about Portland, that are really unique. And it is a unique place. And I think I'm glad to be home. It's a special place. And to be back in the school system again as well, like hanging out with all the kids, they're really inspirational, honestly. So,
Grace, thank you so much for taking the time with me and for sharing your story with Alumni Nation.
Yes, thank you for having me. So fun.